All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending today's webcast session 6C, Water Heaters as a Grid Stability Resource. My name is Peter Grant, and I'll be the moderator for this session. We'll start this webcast with a few housekeeping announcements and then quickly move on to our presentations. First and foremost, thank you to all of our sponsors and ACEEE ally members for their support of the Hot Water Forum and of ACEEE. Second, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions of the presenters. Presenters will not be able to respond to your questions in the chat, but as moderator, I will gather all questions and share for the presenters to answer once all of the presentations are complete. And if we don't get to your question, please join us for 20 minutes of chat and discussion on the Zoom platform immediately following the session. The Zoom link is posted on the audience screen at the very bottom. And also, please refrain from using the chat for any dialogue other than asking questions. Let's try to keep that clean and straightforward. Also, be sure to check out all the tabs on the left-hand side of the app. From there, you can network with the attendees and program participants, you can visit sponsor pages, and you can engage in our game to possibly win a free registration to the 2023 Hot Water Forum in Mission Hills, California. Lastly, we ask everyone to please help in our planning of future hot water forums by completing the conference evaluation. Anyone who completes the evaluation and includes a testimonial will receive a $25 discount off their 2023 Hot Water Forum registration. Sorry about that. All presentations will be available for on-demand viewing to registered attendees on the Socio platform within a few days and will remain available for viewing until May. Presenters' slides can be found on their page in the program participants section. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers. I'll keep the introductions pretty short so we can spend most of our time directly on the presentations themselves. So our first presentation will be put on by Matt Carlson and Zachary Ross. Matt is the CEO of Aquanta Inc., where he is working to bring water heating into the 21st century. He has served on the board of the Peak Load Management Alliance since 2017 and served on the board of the Solar Energy Industries Association from 2013 to 2015. So he clearly brings a lot of expertise to this and a lot of knowledge about how to manage peak load, which is what he's going to be talking about. Well, part of what he's going to be talking about. He's presenting with Zachary Ross, who is a director in Opinion Dynamics Waltham, Massachusetts office, where he leads program evaluations, market assessments, and research studies to support energy efficiency and demand response programs nationwide. So he has supported client engagements in over a dozen states, and he's currently focused on the Midwest, where he's leading opinions, dynamics, evaluation activities for a number of utilities. And then we also have John Butzbaugh for our second presentation, and he performs technology assessment, market research, and economic impact analysis with PNNL. And prior to joining PNNL, he worked at the California Energy Commission, where he looked at strategic planning, project management, and technical expertise in support of the appliance efficiency rulemaking efforts. So with that introduction, I would like to bring up our first two speakers, Matt Carlson and Zachary Ross, so that they can share their presentation with us.
Thanks, Peter. This is Matt from Aquanta here. I'm going to lead off, but then we'll be handing off to Zach and over the course of the presentation. So thank you all for joining us here today, this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I hope you all had, all attendees here had an opportunity to listen to the opening plenary session, because it laid the table for so many of the things that, but at least this session is going to be talking about, and touched on topics of how water heaters and water heating can play a role in energy efficiency, customer engagement, grid connectivity, grid interactivity, and connectivity and smart home integration. And that's what this session is, and our presentation is going to talk about, because that's a lot of things what Aquanta does, but presenting a study that was conducted by Opinion Dynamics on Aquanta data that illuminates, I think, all these. We particularly want to highlight the opportunity for bringing all of those facets to the water heater install base, because really the timing is so great right now, and that there's so much of focus in the new administration, a lot of money that's being deployed around energy efficiency And frankly, a lot of other sectors and a lot of energy efficiency grid enablement technologies are looking to do the same. And so I'm hoping that this session ends up being a bit of a clarion call and an opportunity for us to focus our efforts on really raising the profile for water heaters as an energy efficiency and a grid resource. So Zach, we can go to the next slide. So to touch on very briefly about Aquanta and what we do, because this is going to speak to the data set that Zach and his team were analyzing. So Aquanta is a retrofit controller for storage water heaters. We have conversions for both gas and electric water heaters. Importantly, it is providing a very data-rich sensing and two-way telemetry environment, which provides for, again, a lot of data around water heater behavior, as well as a versatile control environment. Aquanta has tens of thousands of units deployed across North America, primarily in utility programs, which are both on the energy efficiency and the demand response side. But we have many thousands of units that have been sold through retail channels like Amazon and our website. So Aquanta is a connected controller that's taking a kind of a dumb storage water heater and connecting it into a cloud ecosystem that enables all kinds of control capabilities. Among those control capabilities, if we go to the next slide anyway, we've talked about this quite a bit here over the course of the forum, is around grid interactivity, around smart home connectivity, around maintenance alerting, around smart home and customer control. So all kinds of use cases that are fairly well known and talked about for water heaters and water heater control. But what about energy efficiency? Because water heaters are indeed the second largest user of energy in the home. They're using, if we want to talk about macro numbers here in the US, 1.75 quads, which is quadrillion BTUs, I believe, which is almost 2% of the total energy consumption in the US, just to make sure that we have hot showers. So it is an enormous number that I think we could do more to tell the story of. Across the 100 million unit storage water heater installed base, truly it's going to take over a decade to turn over that installed base such that we have a meaningful deployment of grid-enabled water heaters and heat pump water heaters. And so wanted to talk about a data set that Aquanta gleaned from our existing installed base that looked at, hey, what is the energy efficiency opportunity and what is the data and use pattern and load curve data that can be discerned from having a broad deployment and ecosystem of two-way controlled water heaters. So if we can go to the next slide. So Aquanta and frankly, most smart water heaters and smart water heater controls, so whether it's a retrofit or an OEM type of capability, can enable energy efficiency from a variety of ways. One is through kind of autonomous, intelligent control. Second would be manual control, so the customer is able to turn on and off the water heater. So it's enabling things like when they're going away or setting using the water heater control as a timer, and also behavioral. So there's a feedback loop around looking at how much energy is being consumed and comparing to your peers. And so all these things are picking up dimes and quarters every day in reducing standby losses, in reducing the heat cycling, and reducing inefficient heating of a standard storage water heater. And so all those things add up over the course of time. One thing that we, Aquanta, and I think others in the water heater ecosystem have noted is that outside of some very limited studies or maybe work papers that have been done to support state TRMs, is that there hasn't really been a scale review of looking at a scale deployment of smart water heater control, of what the actual energy efficiency impact and opportunity is from smart water heater control. And so Aquanta took the data from, again, many thousands of units across several years, compiled that, and developed a study in conjunction with Opinion Dynamics. And that's why we commissioned Opinion Dynamics to take those data and look at what is the potential impact of these smart control strategies and manual user intervention, and what kind of percentage impacts, or maybe kWh or BTU impacts can be discerned from that. And so I'll turn it to Zach to talk about the study design and the data set that they looked at, and some of the results that they found.
Thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Looking forward to sharing all these findings with all of you. So as Matt mentioned, Aquanta engaged Opinion Dynamics to study these devices and try to better understand the benefits that they provide. And, as Matt mentioned, our kind of primary research objective was to look at the electric and gas savings, whether these devices provide electric and gas savings. If so, what the kind of a magnitude, of those was. And in addition, we wanted to spend some time in the study looking at the data that these devices give us and what else that can tell us about what's going on with water heating. As Matt mentioned, there's a number of, relatively small studies out there that look at water heaters and water heater load shapes in depth, but we're really excited about the opportunity to look at this on a larger data set. So just to give you a little background on the study before we dive into results, Aquanta shared with us data from about 4,000 Aquanta-enabled electric and gas water heaters across the U.S. These are all business-to-consumer sales of Aquanta devices. I think Matt already mentioned, they have some utility-scale deployments, but we are looking at totally those that customers just sort of went out and purchased the devices. And these are largely in single-family homes. So Aquanta provided to us interval data rolled up to a 5-minute level for all these devices from about 2016 to 2021. Of course, some of these devices were installed during that period, and we have shorter periods of usage. But this is well over 1 billion discrete records of telemetry data, giving us a really rich data set to work from. Okay, I want to talk. I know folks aren't here to hear detailed methodological conversations, and I'm looking forward to talking to anybody who wants to hear more about this in the Zoom after this presentation. But I want to give you a little background on what the methodology we use to actually conduct the study was, because the approach is pretty novel and does create a few caveats in how you have to think about the results. So Matt discussed that these devices apply some intelligent controls to help conserve energy once they are installed on the, retrofitted onto existing electric and gas water heaters. And when they are installed, they take a brief period of time to do a sort of learning mode where they look at the existing water heater energy usage and use that data to help them presumably figure out how to more intelligently apply controls to save energy. So what our approach we came up with here was to harvest all of these sort of learning mode data across numerous water heaters. It's what this sort of graph shows, and take all that data and build a synthetic baseline that use the small amount of basically uncontrolled data from each Aquanta installation to develop an estimate of what uncontrolled hot water heater energy usage would look like, and then compare that kind of in a pre-post design to all of the then much larger quantity of controlled data showing us what the water heater energy usage looks like while being controlled by the Aquanta devices. And I won't go through the caveats in great detail, but for those who are familiar with kind of these types of studies know that in a sort of pre-post design like this, you have a few caveats. This is not a randomized control trial. You have to be a little bit cautious potentially about thinking about how to generalize it to the population. And in particular, because these installations were all folks who chose to install Aquantas on their own, there is a little bit of a question about, this baseline. It's going to be somewhat of a proxy for folks who have already started thinking about controlling their energy usage. However, our analysis, which I'm going to go through in a couple of minutes, shows some really tight data ranges and really tight confidence intervals around what we found, has some pretty significant statistical differences between our baseline and control periods, and, has some trends in what the baseline, data look like that make us very confident that what we're seeing is pretty robust. And so while I'll caution anyone from generalizing the final results of this study too much, we think it's the final point estimates in the study too much. We think it's a really robust directional indicator of the potential savings from these devices, and that the results that we see in terms of load shapes, which I'm going to show in a couple of minutes, are really interesting to dig into and to understand what's going on. Okay, so moving on to the next slide here. So before I share the actual study results, I want to talk a little bit about what we know about water heating energy usage in general, and part of why we are excited to work on this study. What I have on the screen here is an EPRI electric load shape for residential electric hot water heaters. The different lines on this figure represent on-peak and off-peak usage, weekdays and weekends, and the specifics aren't particularly important, but they tell a relatively consistent story about how we understand water heater energy usage. So I'll note that this chart, this EPRI graph, is a commonly referenced public source for water heater load shapes. The EPRI load shape library has some, very clear caveats about, how good the data is and it's best available, all that. But this is something that folks often go to try to understand water heater energy usage. There's a few other commonly referenced public sources like EIA REX data, engineering analyses like those in, state technical reference manuals, et cetera. And the really interesting thing here is that there's not really a particularly consistent story. These EPRI load shapes imply annual energy usage of almost 5,000 kilowatt hours a year for electric hot water heaters. Meanwhile, EIA REX data shows us something, that's more than 50% lower than that. Basic engineering analyses, again, show us something that would be, quite a bit lower than that. And so there's really a lot of disagreement in terms of what's out there in terms of how we understand water heater energy use. As Matt mentioned, there's a number of kind of more detailed studies using small populations, a dozen to 100 homes, where folks have used telemetry-enabled devices to study behavior much more closely, but those are limited typically by sample size. And here we were really excited about this opportunity to look at these data in a population of thousands and be able to take from that some really meaningful insights about what we're seeing in terms of water heater usage. All right, so I'm going to start by showing you our estimated baseline load curves for electric Aquanta controlled devices. So these are load curves while the Aquanta devices are in learning mode and therefore are not intelligently controlling water heaters. And these are for electric water heaters only. And you see a load shape that is relatively consistent with that EPRI chart that I showed in terms of its shape. We see morning and evening peaks, but we see a curve that implies a much lower energy usage for hot water heaters as compared to the EPRI curves. The kind of implied annual energy usage that we see here is about 2,600 kilowatt hours a year. This is, again, we have very tight confidence bounds around our estimates. We see very consistent behavior, even though these, devices are kind of scattered throughout the US. We generally see very consistent trends in terms of what device-to-device usage look like. So then to plot on top of that data from the Aquanta devices while they are in active mode and they are intelligently controlling a water heater energy usage, we see a really significant reduction in energy usage overall. I don't have enough time in this presentation to talk about the specifics of what we're seeing in the load shape here in great depth, and I'm sure Matt could share some great insights on that too. But you can just see at a glance, first these dotted lines, which show you the controlled energy usage, are substantially lower than those in the uncontrolled periods. So we see a overall reduction in energy usage, and we see some very specific trends that give us a sense of what the device is potentially doing to help save energy. There's a pretty clear indication here. For example, at the end of the day, the device recognizes that it does not need to recover, tank temperature in the middle of the night, but then it does a sort of kind of potential preheat thing in the morning here, where we're seeing energy usage sometimes even being higher than the uncontrolled ahead of an expected morning peak for water heater usage. And again, we see relatively big differences between weekday and weekend energy usage. Okay, so translating this into energy savings estimates overall, we estimate kind of overall baseline energy usage and then overall annual controlled energy usage presented in this chart here. And the overall takeaway is we see almost a 20% decrease in energy usage after the Aquanta device begins controlling the water heater, about a 19% overall reduction. Matt mentioned before kind of some numbers as to what overall energy usage in the United States that goes toward water heating looks like. So if we look at 173 billion kilowatt hours that go toward electric water heating annually, this suggests there's technical potential to save over 30 billion kilowatt hours, which translates into almost 15 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions reduced, or in dollar terms, that's about $21 billion a year customers spend on electric water heating. If you look at these reductions and kind of translate that, that's over $3 billion you could save on customer energy bills. And in addition, we break out these results in a little more detail by region, and we do see some pretty significant regional differences that you can understand in the context of water temperatures going into the device, et cetera, and seasonal patterns. Similarly, we conducted the same analysis for gas water heaters, and we see much wider confidence intervals around those estimates, which largely relates to sample size. Our data set had quite a few more electric water heaters than it did for gas, but generally we see very similar trends. When you compare the baseline and active periods, you see baseline energy usage that kind of lines up pretty clearly with what we see from other sources. And when you have, look at the controlled mode, the device is saving really significant amounts of energy as compared to the baseline, and fairly similar patterns with respect to how it's saving that energy as compared to electric water heaters. And again, to present these estimates, in terms of annual therms, we see over 25% reduction between the baseline and controlled periods, which translates into a significant number of apologize, my notes on this slide are escaping me, translates into almost 3 billion therms that could be saved annually if you take this reduction at face value, or over $3 billion again in customer bill savings. One last item I want to share before I hand this back over to Matt, just another example of how Aquanta data are being used right now to derive some useful insights, and sort of going to lead into a few thoughts I have about where these kinds of data can bring us in the future. Entirely separate from our study, Aquanta is conducting an ongoing pilot with a Southwestern utility where they have installed 50 devices in a monitor-only mode, so not controlling water heater energy usage, but simply recording it. And as a result, compared to our study, which has this limited amount of baseline data, they have much more complete baseline data and can look at some different types of trends. This chart shows baseline energy usage from January through June 2021 for these 50 sites. And the thing I really want to call your attention to are really strong seasonal effects that we see in hot water heater energy usage. Usage drops by almost 50% over the course of 5.5 months from January to June. Okay, so this leads into kind of a few last comments I want to make here before I hand it back over to Matt. In addition to really significant, opportunity that this study sort of suggests with respect to energy efficiency for hot water heaters, it also shows the value of having these data at a granular level, that the Aquanta devices can enable us to get. Being able to understand, when hot water heaters can provide energy savings, what specific drivers of savings can be, having granular telemetry data like this available from devices that can be linked up with things like demographic data or other information from smart home tech, or data from energy efficiency programs that gives us home characteristics or number of faucets or showers in a home. It just sort of, this is a really rich data set that we are going to be able to use to enable a lot of other research opportunities that, absent being able to record this kind of data with a sort of simple energy saving measure like this that provides other benefits, would typically require us to do sub-metering or some additional research effort that can be pretty costly and time consuming. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to take these data and use them in the future. If these devices continue to be deployed at scale through energy efficiency or DR programs, what those opportunities of having those data provide for program administrators and researchers throughout the country to use to investigate more kind of what the value of water heating can be from a grid perspective. So Matt, with that, I will hand it back to you if you have any other closing thoughts you want to share.
Sure, thanks, Zach. So as both these additional research suggestions and opportunities, and perhaps the study and the data that underlie it suggests. This is really about, I think, speaking to the value of having smart water heater control, and also the customer value of it in terms of savings opportunities. And again, there has been some push in the industry generally about this, and certainly customer uptake around smart control isn't as widespread as perhaps we all across the industry would like. But the value that is coming out of having the data set from the two-way control can help us tell a more compelling story around what the grid enablement opportunity is, around what the end user value opportunity is, and how that compares in terms of relative to other connected devices and measures. Again, I'm thinking about EVs in particular, which are gaining an awful lot of obviously increasing traction, but it is sort of the shiny new object, and you get an awful lot more load from having a controlled car or battery on your PV system. But the value of having grid-enabled water heaters, because it's already out there, and then the incremental cost of grid enabling it is near zero. And so these are things that our hope is that these type of data and this type of story that the data can tell anyway will help raise the profile of grid-enabled technology and control. Lastly, again, there's very much of a tie-in to greenhouse gas aware controls from water heaters, because if you look, and we can refer back to this maybe later if we're doing Q&A, but the water heater is only using something on the order of 60 to 120 minutes of energy. It's energized 60 to 120 minutes a day, and so the ability to align those heat cycles with zero or low greenhouse gas generation is really an interesting opportunity. And Nest has started doing that with their thermostat, with their Nest Renew program. And so those are the kind of things that Aquanta is looking at, and I would challenge all of our peers across the ecosystem to think about, hey, how can we be more aggressive in telling the story of smart and two-way control for water heaters, but also expanding what are some of the use cases that are available. So, and with that, I'll close, unless Zach, you have any final comments.
No, thanks, Matt.
Okay.
Back to you, Peter.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for that great presentation and for staying on time, so I didn't even have to give you a time warning. Yeah, so now we have a few minutes for question and answer. So anybody who has a question that you would like to direct to these two gentlemen, don't hesitate to use that chat window, and I can read it and share it with them. For now, we do have a couple of questions. And so first question was for Zach, and the table you showed with the energy savings of electric water heaters by region showed significantly lower savings in the Southeast than in other parts of the country. Do you know why that is?
Sorry, trying to get myself off mute here. So I don't know why that is from the specific details of our study. I have some potential thoughts about regional variations in existing device efficiency and things like that potentially are drivers, but I can't make any conclusive statements based on the data we've looked at so far. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything you want to add there. I know you know the base pretty well, so.
Yeah, so the U.S. Southeast has the highest percentage of electric water storage water heaters, and so consequently, the data set was actually largest from that. But in the Southeast, you have two things going. One is that you have obviously a warmer ambient environment, right? So you have less standby loss on average relative to other places in the country. So particularly if that water heater is in a garage or in an unconditioned basement. Secondly, you have higher water intake temperature. So even though you still have that strong seasonality curve, literally you're seeing between 50 and 100% delta between the winter and the summer energy usage, but that means a lower saving opportunity, because if you're extending out the time between water heat reheat cycles, right, the water is on average warmer, and so less standby loss and kind of control opportunity. So you're dealing with a lower number to start with, and so you're going to get a lower percentage essentially.
Okay.
But still meaningful number, I think.
Oh yeah, it was double digits. It's a good savings amount. I don't remember if it was 11 or 18, but this is still a considerable amount of savings regardless. And so in that response, Matt, you touched on another question that came up, which was talking about the plot looking at the impact of season on water heater electricity consumption. And it really showed that significant decrease as you go from winter to summer. And we're wondering if you have insight into the causes of this. Is it solely the change in cold water temperature and air temperature? Or does your data also imply that there might be behavior change as you go from one season to the next?
It's almost entirely driven by the water intake temperature. The warmer the water, the less water heater has to work, but also the mix ratio between the cold and hot when it's coming out of the faucet is going to be a lot different. So you literally are turning the knob less, right, to get the 105 degrees, which is coming out of the shower head or the faucet. So but there are also the ambient environment, and also the usage pattern just tends to be a little bit different. We've heard and seen some studies that people tend to take longer showers in the wintertime. Right? It feels good. It's cold out. So at any rate, but besides interesting from an academic standpoint, that has a huge impact when it comes to the grid value of a water heater, right? Because you're going to get a lot less during a summer morning than a winter morning. And we at Aquanta and in the energy ecosystem generally, we talk about that when people say, well, how much load do you get out of a water heater? Well, of course, it depends on the season, the time of day, and the region that you're talking about. But generally speaking, water heater is a winter peaking load. And that is a resource, frankly, that water heaters have an advantage relative to a lot of other grid resources or DSM resources that are out there.
Okay. Yeah. Zach, anything to add there, or next question?
No, I think Matt captured it very well.
Great. Yeah. So one thing I'd like to, dive into a little more in that response was you talking about, maybe there's anecdotal evidence or theories that people take shorter showers in the summer than in the winter because, in the winter they want the nice hot shower, and in the summer they're already warm enough. Is there anything in your data set that we can analyze to investigate that claim, or, is that just not what it was designed for?
I'm sorry, Matt, go ahead, please. I was going to say, I'm definitely interested to hear, anything Matt would want to add. With the data available to us, kind of being able to tease out exactly what's going on in terms of usage, was not possible. But I think this is a really good example of how this data could be really powerful when you kind of deploy these devices in applications where you might have some more information. Mm-hmm. So if you were deploying Aquanta devices in a utility program or in some other place where we could couple that with customer research to help understand, what are the customers who install these devices doing? What are their self-reported behavioral patterns? I think we can enable some really rich analysis to help us answer some questions like that frankly, I'm not sure I've ever seen really quantitatively explored in the literature before. So,
and there have been some very limited and a little bit dated academic studies on this, but that's kind of where we pulled that. So, and I do want to substitute out yes, obviously the studies from Aquanta data, but I would subs it out for what are the opportunities out there, just like smart water heater control, right? Because obviously the OEMs have smart water heaters. There are other two-way water heater controls out there. So being able to seeing more studies like this and telling the story of the value that's behind them, I think is going to be one of those rising tide raises all boats situations. Mm-hmm. I see in the chat that somebody asked if the final report is publicly available. It is not. This is a proprietary study that we did. We are sharing it with our clients. Happy to share an executive summary and have that posted on the ACEEE site. If you all want to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to talk about that more. And I see Emily asked one other question, and we do not include heat pump water heaters in this. This is just electric storage and a subset of gas water heaters.
So were heat pump water heaters specifically excluded from this study? And if so, is that because they were going to cause some problems that electric resistance water heaters would not have?
It's actually more about how Aquanta works. We don't specify it to be retrofit on a heat pump water heater, right? They tend to have their own controls. So that would be an off-label application of Aquanta. So we specify not installing an Aquanta on a heat pump water heater. It's possible and people have done it, but generally speaking, they have their own control systems and two-way telemetry from them.
And I was going to say to Matt's point there, as he's commented on before, I think you can extend some of the same principles we used in a study like this to what the value from telemetry data from, grid-enabled heat pump water heaters would be, right? So while you're not going to see the specific control strategies that Aquanta are putting into play and then the resulting energy savings, I think the ability to derive insights from, coupling telemetry data with customer research, et cetera, was there for those devices as well. So I'd really love to see folks begin to dig into that and research and tell us what they find.
Yeah, I think that could be a great extension from this research project. So I see we've got just a couple minutes left before bringing Josh in. So one other question that came up was about the future work focused on water heater energy storage value, especially around days and seasons. So could you elaborate on that? What would that research project look like? What sorts of questions would you be addressing? How would you expect to use that information, etc.?
Matt, do you want to if you want to add anything about what your clients that you've worked with have kind of expressed interest in? I'd love to hear that. I guess just from an evaluation perspective, the opportunity to use really granular data from Aquanta retrofit devices or other water heaters that have smart controls to be able to really understand at a very granular level when water heater energy usage is occurring, what types of behavioral changes or controls we can apply to water heater energy usage to, help avoid peaks, right? Help nudge usage to other times of the day, et cetera, and what the value of that becomes. I think having data like these, just like folks have begun to use telemetry data from other grid-enabled energy-consuming devices to kind of answer similar research questions, I think we have a really unique opportunity to start doing that with water heating. So.
Yeah, again, the storage value of a water heater derives from how much of the tank is not heated to the set point temperature, and if your water heater is smart enough to know, this household typically only uses half of their hot water in the morning, but I've got my solar system that's coming on in the afternoon, and based on prior use patterns, that this home is going to be net exporting energy. So why don't we have the water heater suck up wait until 1 in the afternoon and then suck up that energy? And so those are the types of control strategies that are available. But underlying that, though, is the historical data from a given site, knowing what the use pattern is, and then being able to tie that into a grid system, and then a smart control to keep it from heating when it otherwise would.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And looking at the clock, it's time for us to transition over to Josh's presentation. And so Josh is going to be giving us some information about recent research he's been doing at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Are you ready, Josh?
I am ready. Can you hear
me? All right.
Okay?
Take it away.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm not quite as good looking at the rest of you guys. So let me get my presentation queued up. Here we go. Here we go. So I'm going to present on a field study of grid connected heat pump water heaters in the Southeast. This is really the first cut of this analysis. We were hoping to get more of this analysis done, but I've been sick and a few other members of the team have been sick. And so we didn't get quite as much done as we wanted to, but this is kind of a sneak peek. I worked on this project with Ebony Mayhorn and Travis Ashley of PNNL, and Sharon Metzger of PNNL was also an advisor, and then Karen Finauti and Danny Parker of FSEC. So I'll go into some background, discuss the field study prep, methodology, the results, a little discussion, really just a summary of takeaways, and then we'll go into questions and answers. A little background, in 2017 and 2018, BPA, Portland General Electric, and NEA designed a large-scale grid-connected heat pump water heater demonstration and invited PNNL to conduct the analysis. This was using the CTA 2045 standard, which is now called EcoPort. And as a result of this study, it demonstrated that grid-connected heat pump water heaters are an effective resource to shift load on a daily basis in the Pacific Northwest. And so after this study concluded, DOE and PNNL got together and we said, hey, can we repeat this in another region with high energy savings and load shifting potential? And that brought us to the Southeast region, which is an ideal candidate for heat pump water heaters, both due to the high penetration of residential electric water heaters, as well as some of the incentives that are needed for heat pump water heaters in this region of the country, and in particular Florida, which has incentives that are really limited to municipalities due to the state rules on how technologies can be eligible for incentives. However, Florida has a lot of load shifting programs, which means that if you can introduce grid connectivity to heat pump water heaters, perhaps that can allow them to pass those tests and become eligible for incentives across the state, including IOUs. PNNL partnered with FSEC to conduct a two-track study. I'm going to talk about the field study part, but FSEC also did lab testing of grid-connected heat pump water heaters in their lab. That was really nice because we could do some more experimental tests in the lab and then bring those into the field and see whether or not they were applicable. Surprisingly, some of them weren't directly as applicable as we had thought, and so that's kind of where the two tracks make it interesting. We started with recruitment in March of 2020. This was really advantageous because we had a pandemic around then, and people were really eager to jump into a field study. No, I'm just kidding there. It actually took a lot of work to get people into this field study, especially in the early going. We average roughly 3 people per home, and most of these heat pump water heaters are 50 gallons of storage, and they're located in unconditioned garages. That's important to keep in mind as we go forward and look at the results. We studied 3 different commands using EcoPort. One is the load up, in which we bring the water heater set point, the tank and the water up to set point. And then the shed and critical peak are both curtailment commands that tell the water heater to turn off. And then the water heater responds based on manufacturer algorithm as to how long it can turn off based on primarily temperature. So we looked at 4 conventional strategies. We call them conventional because we repeated them from the Pacific Northwest, and then 12 new strategies. The experiments began in November 2020. They're still running on today. We closed the analysis period in February. I'll try not to get into too much detail about the methodology. What I really want to drive home is that we had 3 different baselines that we created to account for air temperature. So we have one in the winter, one in the shoulder season, and then one in the summer. And as you can see in the graph on the right, these ended up with different power profiles. You can kind of see that traditional 2-peak power profile for water heating energy use. and in particular, the evening peak was larger in this case. Oh, and I'll just briefly state that the bins were, for the winter, less than 59 degrees Fahrenheit, shoulder was 59 to 78, and then summer was 78 and greater for our average daily air temperatures. So our load shifting strategies were based on insight from utilities, and particularly utilities in Florida, which had told us the peak demand periods were 6 to 9 a.m. in the morning and 4 to 8 p.m. in the evening. We wanted our curtailment to always begin at 6 a.m. in the morning and evening at 4 p.m. And so our load up periods always preceded those two times. For sake of showing our graphs, we abbreviated our load shifting strategies into this code of numbers and letters. The first character is always the morning load up duration, and then the second is the morning curtailment and the curtailment type. The third is the evening load up duration, and then the fourth is the evening curtailment duration and curtailment type. So you see the 1 3S, 1 4S, it means a 1 hour load up in the morning, 3 hour shed in the morning, 1 hour load up in the evening, and then a 4 hour shed in the evening. This bar graph on the right shows the number of samples. So this is the number of participants multiplied by the number of days in which the events took place. One thing you'll notice right away is that we didn't get a lot of good winter data. Our winter number of samples was roughly, I think, about 150 to 200 samples total, whereas for the shoulder period, we had more like 1,200 total samples. In the summer, I think about 600. What that really means is just that our winter results we have a little bit less confidence in, so to speak. But if you compare the different shoulder results, that's a good data set. And so you can kind of see relative using the shoulder period. All right, jumping into our results. This is the average daily energy per strategy on the left, and then average daily energy increase or decrease per strategy on the right. You'll notice right away the seasonal impact. The green bars are always taller because in the winter we had the colder temperatures in the temperature bin, which meant, and for the unconditioned heat pump water heaters, they had less heat to extract from the air, and then they also had larger delta T's for increasing the incoming water temperature to set point. One thing we noticed was that the strategies with the longer load up duration in the afternoon had less daily energy consumption. You'll notice that in the right graph, particularly 1.5C, 3.5C, and then 1.5C, 5.5C. Those both had a 3 to 5 hour load up duration in the evening, and they had much less energy use. I do want to note the strategy 1.4S, 1.5S. You'll notice it has the highest daily energy use and also the highest increase. That's a good one to keep in mind going forward because you'll see that repeat in the following graphs. This is our morning load up. On the left graph, you're going to see load up power per hour, and on the right, you're going to see total energy across the entire load up period. One thing we noted was that the 2 hour load up really didn't buy us much additional thermal storage. It was really the 1 hour load up that was adequate. And so after we ran a few experiments with the 2 hour load up, we kind of saw these results and we focused more on the 1 hour morning load up. And you'll see the 1.4S, 1.5S has that large reduction, large load up, which you'll see also leads to the larger reduction in this graph. So the morning curtailment, you have your curtailed power per hour on the left, and then energy per strategy. The 1.4S, 1.5S did lead to the largest energy curtailment. However, what we noticed was that as you extend the duration, you're getting diminishing returns. So if you really want to focus on that 3 hour period from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., that you can get a good curtailment from focusing on those 3 hours. If you want additional hour or 2 hours, you can also get some curtailment, but it's not going to be at the same rate as what you saw for the 3 hours in the peak. We took a look at the morning post curtailment rebound. So this is the hour following curtailment. And if you're trying to absorb additional renewable energy, solar energy, this is a really good period to get that bounce, because in a lot of cases, this is starting at 10 or 11 or noon, depending on the length of your morning curtailment. And you'll see that the 1.4S, 1.5S responded really well, but you also have some others like the 1.3C, 1.4C that had good curtailment, good rebound to absorb that solar energy. And we noticed in particular that the critical peak command ended up with a larger rebound than shed. For the evening load up, we had some interesting results. You'll see in the right graph, it's average total load up energy per strategy. So the longer load up duration in this graph, it's almost kind of cheating because it's capturing some of that rebound. And so it's not really an apples to apples comparison. Still wanted to show this because that's that solar energy peak period that you're absorbing that energy. So that's good energy to get into the water heater. These are the results for the evening curtailment. On the left is the average curtailed power per hour. On the right is total curtailed energy per strategy. The 1.4S, 1.5S performing really well again, which also has the highest energy use per day. We noticed a similar pattern from the morning, which is just diminished returns with extending the curtailment duration. And this is our post-curtailment rebound. Again, critical peak led to a larger rebound than shed in the evening, and the evening rebound was larger than the morning rebound. So these are the takeaways, at least of this analysis. Again, this is kind of an abbreviated analysis. We didn't get as much done for this as we would have liked. So you will be seeing more from this study going forward. But some of the obvious ones, just the colder the weather, the greater the heat pump water heater load and less load shifting impact. That morning load up of 1 hour is sufficient. We didn't see a benefit to extending duration. Extending the evening load up led to a decrease in daily energy consumption. We're going to explore this further and take a harder look at as to why that was. And we saw diminishing returns with extending the curtailment duration. The evening post-curtailment rebound was larger, and the critical peak command resulted in a larger rebound than shed. This is our analysis team. Myself, Ebony, Travis, Karen, and Danny. I really should have put a picture of Sharon on here because she's been a really good advisor throughout this study. I also put one additional slide because we have a little time just to say that we have a lot that we still want to do. We want to incorporate electric resistance water heater baseline to indicate not only what you get with the heat pump water heater load shifting, but that permanent load decrease that you get using a heat pump water heater. We'd love to use more of a 2-variable approach that incorporates both the air temperature and forecasted ground temperature. So accounting for both the inlet water temperature and air temperature surrounding the heat pump water heater. We'd like to do a deeper analysis of the shed versus the critical peak curtailment types. And then we'd like to look at our occupancy. So large versus smaller occupancy homes, and then looking at conditioned versus unconditioned space. So a lot more to come on this.
Okay, great. Thank you for that presentation, Josh. And it's always very interesting to see, how technologies transition from one region of the country with one set of characteristics over to a different region of the country with a different set of characteristics. We have one question just showing up right now. So, did the homes where you're doing this study have mixing valves installed? If so, why? If not, why not? And did you consider testing CTA 2045's advanced load up feature?
That's a great question. So we did not have mixing valves in any of these homes. And when we started this study, CTA 2045B had yet to been finalized. So the advanced load up control had yet to really hit the ground. We did do some studying of the advanced load up in the FSAC lab using a heat pump water heater prototype, which was really cool, but it didn't make it into the field in time for this study.
Okay, that actually sounds very similar to something I said during a presentation yesterday. Advanced, if only advanced load up existed earlier, we could have used it in field projects, right? So I guess one other question that I had was that I noticed you were using a 6 to 9 a.m. curtailment period, which isn't very common. I know, at least doing California research, we don't worry about a morning peak nearly as much as an evening peak. So I'm wondering, was that motivated by Florida having a morning peaking problem? And if so, do you know what is driving that?
Great question. So George Gerlaski from Duke Energy Florida has presented at the Hot Water Forum a few times. And in Florida, when you have cold snaps in the morning, everyone turns on their electric baseboard heat, and it can really lead to some issues for the grid and for utilities. And so that morning peak period during the winter especially is really important in Florida. So if you were to really prioritize, it's that morning peak during the winter and then the evening peak during the summer that are really the high priority peak periods. And we did talk to some folks at local utilities in Florida just to confirm what our curtailment time periods were going to be.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't realize that Florida had a lot of electric baseboard heating, so that would really explain where a morning peak would come from. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's now time to move over to the Zoom meeting so we can have a less formal and more conversational question and answer period. You should see the information for it in the top of the chat window, where there's both a Zoom link that you can use to access the meeting, and then there's also a passcode that you will need to get in. So please use that information and come join us for a discussion after this.